Welcome to our Rethinking Intervention series. This is Emily Freitag at Instruction Partners, and I'm so glad today to be talking to Sandra Alberti at Student Achievement Partners, and full disclosure, also my board chair for Instruction Partners. Sandra, welcome. Thank you for talking to us today. As we do with all of these, we want to start in your own personal place. So tell us your own story as a learner and what that has taught you about learning.
Great. So in reflecting on this, I would say my first reaction is I don't think my story is super interesting about my own personal story about learning. I think if I reflect back on my life as a student, we'll just say, because I think learning is something that has continued, that I did originally think about learning as very much kind of task completion orientation. And I remember in my own kind of formal schooling, probably not being until mid high school where I was no, this isn't just about completing tasks that someone assigns to you. This is actually an opportunity to reflect and learn and gain information. And I felt once I experienced the challenge, the opportunity to learn independently, in this particular case, from text, because I wasn't going to learn from a teacher, that gave me this kind of superpower that I felt most of my student colleagues in high school, definitely my colleagues at the university, didn't have that power of learning independently from texts that are in front of you, challenging yourself to do that in a way that wasn't just what I was receiving, what I was given, but that there was actually an active component to it. So I think in thinking about, going from student to adult, teacher, educator, professional, this affinity for learning as not a chore, but almost a necessary element of living. Mm-hmm. I feel fortunate to have a good experience in being able to do that, and feel fortunate in my position at Student Achievement Partners that I know that is a huge part of what we intend for students, the experience that we hope for students, that it's not just completing a set of tasks, even being engaged, being the equivalent of being on task, but that students are actually engaged actively in ways that cause them to think and learn, not just complete and, move on. Mm-hmm. That joy of self-directed learning, I think is part of what I thought about when I was thinking about this.
Mm-hmm. Which it sounds like it's both the ability to learn independently from text and from reflection. I was hearing you get at as well. Mm-hmm. Thank you for starting us there. So you have held many, many roles in education, teacher, principal, system leader, state leader, now school board chair. And then you work at Student Achievement Partners, and Student Achievement Partners includes a team of many individuals who have played important roles in the development of the standards and the supports around the standards. So from both of those backgrounds and experience sets, share with us any thoughts you have on what we know works in the act of learning. And in particular, we've been exploring this idea of accelerating learning, or helping students with unfinished learning recover learning.
Yeah, so I do think that there is this consistent drumbeat about belief in students and clarity around expectations. And we think about those things in two separate bullets. We need to know what is it that the standards expect? Is it clear? Do we know what it looks like in practice? Do we have resources to support it? And we can do all of those things. And if underlying there is a conscious, or more likely unconscious, disbelief that students can, I don't know that the greatest set of resources are going to get us where we need to go. So I really see this idea of what works as very much starting with what is easily said, but not often deeply examined, belief that all students deserve a high quality education, all students, with the appropriate supports, belief, encouragement, deserve a place where they feel valued, they feel respected, that it can't just be about what we push down. And I think often we think about these things in two separate buckets, relationship, people have, gone down the route of personalization and all of that. And I think that has all been very misconstrued, misrepresented, because it has always been in separate service, like, so the kids can feel engaged, so that they feel that they can belong, where all of that is really in service to providing students access to excellent instructional opportunities and things that they are actually able to excel in. I think we have work to do in respecting students and respecting where they come, what assets they bring. I think too often, particularly with students who are most often at the margins, with good intention, I would say, most often, we do things that actually prevent them from feeling valued, from being respected, from being able to excel in the things that will make the biggest difference for kids, in their lives as students, and then their lives beyond that. So it may sound odd, like coming from Student Achievement Partners, where we talk about math and literacy standards. Those, standards themselves are never have been or never were what help students. It is that creates a roadmap that then requires a lot of work. And the more and more I think about this, the more and more I think about like the role of, teacher and student identity in this work as being a critical component.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that has been a common theme across these conversations as well. You started to talk a little bit about some of the things that we do unintentionally or even intending care that actually don't work. Can you go into more detail, maybe in each of the disciplines, about what you see as some of those things?
Sure. So I do feel like in literacy, obviously one of the things that, I'll just say college and career ready, Common Core, whatever, we paid little attention in policy documents of standards of what students were reading. And I know in my own role at the State Department in New Jersey, like I knew that the things that were marking the experience of a literacy education in Newark, New Jersey was very different than what was marking the experiences and the texts and the authors and the kinds of conversations that were being had in other school districts in the state. Not to say that one was better or one was worse. I mean, we had rich conversations, but I think oftentimes we, both ways, want kids to be having a shared experience. And with what isn't working, I think often we create ceilings, particularly for kids that we worry most about. We don't expose them to, quality texts. I think there's a lot of concern right now when it comes to what kids are reading and really pushing into a very important issue of culturally responsive texts, let's just say. And I don't want anybody for a minute to think that the common canon is separate from culturally responsive. Mm-hmm. There is, challenging quality grade level texts that we owe it to every student in America to have access to. And I think from good intention, sometimes against prior practice that we've been taught or we've been, reinforced about, has been this notion of an avoidance of struggle, an avoidance of, if we ask too much of students, they're going to be disengaged and not want to do more. And from the very beginning, I mean, I remember, most clearly when we started with, talking about things like letter from a Birmingham, mm-hmm. thinking about kids who never engaged in that level of text-based conversation that like just blew teachers away. Like they never anticipated that students would be able to engage at that level. And so I feel like oftentimes we create this gateway before students even have a shot at being exposed to grade level. We already make judgments about what they can and can't do. And similarly in math, I mean, we're at a place now in the year 2020 where we have more opportunities to engage in quality math tasks. They're more available than they've ever been before. But even in places where, you know, the books in front of kids, the worksheets in front of kids include some of those rich tasks, we see teachers kind of undercutting them by, you know, eliminating this requirement or changing this piece of vocabulary or not expecting as much out of these students, without even giving them a shot. Again, sometimes thinking that this is the best thing for them. And so it is a very often had conversation, particularly in the world of high quality instructional materials, which is like, well, what can my kids do versus what opportunities can I provide my students to access, you know, this kind of expectation.
Yes, we have been exploring the tension between meet kids where they are and provide challenge that is equitable across students. Dig in a little bit with assessment. This is a theme we're starting to explore, something I know you've been thinking a lot about. What are best practices and malpractices that
it's interesting. I mean, of course, you know, a lot of our thoughts and actions lately are inspired by the COVID stay home online learning situation. And certainly, as you know, we're thinking now at the end of May, beginning of June already, anticipating the challenges that will be facing within the upcoming school year, if not school years. And there are certainly exacerbated issues. I don't want to belittle those at all. But there are also some realizations that things that weren't working well before are just, you know, we have a brighter light on those things. I think we kind of talked about in an earlier conversation today, that there's just brighter lights on things that might have just had a flashlight on them before, now quite in the spotlight. And so this notion of assessments of various types is super important now. We believe that data is important. For sure, that data is important. And who needs to know what is certainly part of this conversation right now. But oftentimes when we think about assessment practice, we think about kind of like two things that concern me. One is like, how do we use assessments to label and sort kids, which isn't always what is most helpful to this. And two, how do we use assessments to identify students' deficits rather than using assessments to identify students' strengths? And so what I feel very strongly about, and I won't say this is the official SAP position, so this is kind of like a Sandra Alberti position, is that coming back to this school year coming up, students have experienced education in a huge variety of ways. You know, everything from having, you know, parents shoulder to shoulder supporting their learning, students identifying their own interests and really, quite frankly, excelling in this kind of a structure, to students who are, you know, left independent either as a function of the school district and community that they live in, or within a supportive community as a function of the household that they live in, you know, super troubling. And so I feel like there is an ongoing kind of instinctual need to say the first order of business needs to be like, let's figure out where kids are when they come to us. And I worry tremendously about two aspects of that idea. One being that when we are kind of judging students and where they are and how much learning they lost, we're not just judging the students, we're judging their home situation. in a way that I think has always been true, but will absolutely differences beyond what we typically see this year. And then two, when we're finally like back into it, that the first thing that we do is label and sort kids versus building community versus building connections in schools, which I just think is going to be critically important this fall. That being said, you know, we have lots of different ideas about what do we need. You know, Student Achievement Partners just last week published priority instructional content for math and for literacy, where we did look for the 2020-21 school year. What are the priority standards that we think are absolutely important to support grade level instruction? The big fear being this notion of prerequisite. If you don't pass a certain, you know, set of knowledge and skills from the prior year, that you're not going to be able to access grade level. And quite frankly, that would just set us back at least 10 years of work that many school leaders have really been, you know, executing on in a very powerful way of late. And so, you know, we feel like the best form of assessment for the year ahead is going to be an integrated assessment system. You won't know anything better about where your kids are and what they need than you will find out from formative, given by a teacher, having conversations, checks for understandings, in contrast with, you know, a very, you know, disconnected from the curriculum, disconnected from instructional information that you can act upon, that just gives you a score, and like I said, leads to sorting and labeling of kids, but does not help in any way to support student learning. And so the idea that any kind of assessment, you know, whether it's formative or, you know, benchmark kind of interim testing, that is absolutely instructionally relevant is the most important thing, because, you know, for sure we're going to open this world of differentiation and scaffolding necessary in the upcoming year in a way that I think we haven't done before. I think kids are going to need more scaffolds, a variety of scaffolds, and we are not aware of many, you know, formal assessment programs that provide that kind of information to a teacher. Quite frankly, I think we do know that formative integrative assessment is probably the best thing a teacher can do, you know, for social reasons as well as for instructional planning. And so the other kind of word that I hear kind of bantered around quite a bit lately is this need to diagnose. I had the good fortune in my state education job to work with an amazing psychometrician, and every time I even said diagnose, he would make sure I knew exactly what that meant. And it's not just asking one question, you know, there's a sophistication to diagnosing anything. And so I think what we are best served in doing right now is not to think about diagnosing individual kids, but diagnosing what is our instructional plan in a subject area, in a grade level, in a school system. How do we diagnose where our community is right now? What do they need? Versus this notion of a diagnostic plan for every individual kid. I just don't think it's going to serve us well, considering time, resources, and relevancy to the work that we have ahead of us.
Interesting. I'm just sitting here realizing, like, you know, you diagnose a problem, you don't diagnose a person. And that's interesting. I'm going to think about that more. So what you've alluded to a couple things that I think you're thinking about as really important in the return to school and in the work to come. You've talked about building community. Tell us what else, you know, you think educators should be keeping top of mind as they think about the job ahead.
Well, I do feel like, one, I worry tremendously that anybody thinks that next year is going to be anything like the years that we've had before. And I think there's been a lot of energy about saying, you know, it will never be the same again, nor because, boy, have we learned so much about, you know, inequities in the system. We've learned so much about different students having different learning styles. You mentioned that I'm, sit on a local school board, and, for everything that we can find people that hate, we can find other students who love those same things. And it's interesting because, we're taking that input and that feedback in ways that we never did with, we'll just say, traditional school. But I'm sure with everything we did traditionally, you could find families who loved it and families and students who hated it. We just feel like we all have more voice and say right now. And I think that's important to think about what we've learned in that way as well. The other lesson that I just hope, beyond hope, that we can really hold on to, through this experience is this opportunity that we've all experienced to rapidly on solutions to very tough problems, to try something out, get some feedback on it, iterate on it, going back to my reflective learner kind of opening from the beginning. Like that's what learning is all about. That's what we as educators should be thinking about, lead learning. And I think we've gotten into the habit, decades old, of thinking, that we always need to lead with the perfect answer, with the perfect plan, that this can't be messy. We can't kind of like show our vulnerabilities and, hey, here's something I'm exploring. Here's something that I need to know. Like we would have never gotten there as far as we've gotten in the last 2+ months if we let perfection be acting quickly. And I think we've seen, systems and leaders who are natural learners, who don't shy away from their vulnerabilities and their opportunities to learn, really lean into the opportunity to learn and innovate right now. And those who are, very much about I only put out packages that are tied neatly with the bow and everything is, controlled and predicted and everything, like really having trouble getting out of the starting blocks in this place. And so I hope that we think about, once we, get out of this and everybody's, back in school structures, what it looks like, that we start naming what are some of the problems that we actually have just kind of thought were immutable over time, and think about what are some things that we might want to engage together to try to learn from, so that we can, start moving a little faster toward improvement in our profession than we have done in the past.
That resonates. I think the series, this Rethinking Intervention series, is exploring questions that we might all feel like we should have answers to. And yet, obviously, we hasn't been working as effectively as possible. And what stalled us from talking about that in the same way a year ago? Yeah.
Right.
I appreciate that. Anyone else we should be learning from? Anyone else we should be talking to?
No, I think there's lots of great, work being done. I've been super impressed and thinking, and I don't know, like even some funder leaders, I think would be super interesting to think about from their perspective and the work that they hope and anticipate from in schools, what they've learned, what they hope to inspire in others. I think there are, I know, many school district leaders that are fantastic. I think people, need to be inspired by people who are leaning into this work and seeing what's possible. I just think that, as an educator, you yourself the same, like this is an opportunity to learn, and, we should value that and treasure that and not, rush that, allow ourselves to gain from it.
Thank you for joining us. And the Student Achievement Partners prioritized content guides can be found at achievethecore.org.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.